Good morning. My name is Lou Cerny. I'm a vice president with SEDLAC, and I'll be starting the session this morning here. And we're going to wait a couple of minutes here just to make sure that if there are some attendees who are just a minute or two late, we'll give them the opportunity to view the whole session. As a reminder, these sessions are recorded. So if for some reason you need to leave a session, feel free to come back and we'll be able to have you see those sessions at your leisure. Also, as a reminder, this is the first in a series of sessions that we're hosting this year. We'll have one more in August, one more in September, and potentially another one in October. The question and answer box that you have on your computer screens can be used to answer questions for any of the speakers. We'll be monitoring that, and then we will look to address questions at the end of the session. We will try to get through as many as possible. We're anticipating that the session itself will last roughly 60 minutes, giving plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And beyond that, I think we're going to get ready to move into the sessions here. So again, the title basically is Automation in the Supply Chain from Processes to Robotics. And certainly, as it says below that, automation is looking on ways to be able to have your supply chain deal with disruptions. And if we want to only look back at the last 2 or 3 years, or maybe 4, I think we can certainly all understand what this impact of disruptions has been on all our lives in the supply chain. As we go, we did ask you all to give us some information to help make sure that we're addressing the topics that are appropriate. And so the first question we asked was, what people systems automation initiatives has your company implemented in the past year? And based on the responses, the largest majority was looking at robotics and automation. And we'll be addressing that in part today, and then in the 2 follow-up sessions, one with Swisslog and then one with BrightPick. And then the other part is systems, which we'll be spending a fair amount on today. I view material handling systems as really kind of going under that automation for most people at this point. And network strategy is still very alive and well as far as the industry is concerned. We are seeing great interest in the network strategies, and that's primarily because of the fact that people are trying to make sure that they're servicing their customers, and again, at the least cost, using the appropriate number of facilities. And then labor management systems is at the bottom of the list. I'll have more to say on that in about a minute or two here. So if we go back to the next slide here, we'll see that it pretty much mimics the first one, robotics and automation, and then information systems falls in the second place. And here's my comments on labor management, and that will be specifically addressed in our 3rd session, which comes up in September. TZA will be part of that session there. And I'm surprised in many respects that, as we're all looking at how do we do more for less, how do we maintain associates, how do we keep our costs as low as possible and productivity as high as possible. Labor management systems certainly is a major way in making that happen. And, all I can do is encourage you to take a look at it. It's not yesterday's labor management systems. Today's can be often implemented in less than 90 days and have a payback between 6 months and a year. So even though it's lower on the list, we certainly look to have you give some serious consideration to LMS, and certainly encourage you to attend that session, obviously, as well. The next one we asked was basically, what do you want to see in future events? Well, here I'd say, other than pick to light, the good news is we will be addressing these in today's session and then in the subsequent ones to follow. So, we will certainly keep in mind the pick to light and can include that in future sessions, but the other 3, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see that we are covering those in the series that we're presenting here today. So at that point, it's my pleasure to introduce Kara Ashby. She's the president of SEDLAC, and I'll let her take it from here. Kara?
Thanks, Lou. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on today's event. We're happy to have you. As Lou said, I'm the president of SEDLAC. I've been with the organization going on 28 years, and I'm proud to have today's speakers present today. With us, we have from Murdoch's, Robert Michoud, and from Texas, we have Guy Carton. So I'm excited to present to you, Robert, to talk a little bit more about what Murdoch's does and a little bit about himself. Robert.
Great. Happy to be here. I was at Microsoft for about 20 years, basically implemented every type of information technology out there, from ERP systems to operational technologies to data analytics systems. It was a great kind of proving ground to really develop kind of an end-to-end breadth for enterprise technologies. I finished my career as chief technology officer for our supply chain. So at Microsoft, so that was every physical product that Microsoft built. Essentially Xbox, all their keyboards and mice business. As you've seen, they've started to refocus more on cloud. So there was a great opportunity for me at that point to step away from that role. And I ended up here in Montana, partly because I have two passions and both involve frozen water. One is climbing waterfalls that freeze, ice climbing, and the other is skiing. So there was no better place anywhere in the United States except right here for both of those. And did that for a bit. And then my wife kicked me out because of the summer, there's nothing to do. So decided to pick up a gig here, helping out a local company who's growing rapidly and needed some help with digital transformation. So it's been really fun for the last 5 years to help them on their journey, and hope to share some of that with you guys here today. So part of what we wanted to lay out, automation is one of those things that everyone's trying to grasp. If you hit the next slide. And for us, it was kind of imperative because we, like I said, the company was growing from 5 stores to 40 with aspirations to hit 100. We're broadly across the West. We sell over 300,000 products. We have an online presence. We have many different customer types, from ag customers, and yes, that's really a horse in the store, to normal urban customers. We have stores outside of Denver. A lot of complexity is really what we manage, and we have to do it in a very seamless way. If you hit the next slide, this just represents kind of the breadth, and I don't even have Texas on here yet, which is, it's even going to get bigger in terms of how we have to move product, manage product. We do, direct to store. We have DCs. How do we manage matching supply and demand across that? And if you just look at Montana alone, it's the 4th largest state in the United States by geographic area. And if you overlay it over Europe there, you can just kind of get a representation of the physical distance that we're talking about. So our stores really become, they're very strategic for us because they're these hubs. And we manage all of our fulfillment out of our stores. And we also do customer service in our stores. And we do a lot of customer education and things like that. And so the way that we manage our .com presence, omnichannel stuff, is we kind of think of that website as an extension of our store, so that we really try to serve and push people into our stores. Obviously, if people want to be served on .com, we enable that as well. And I have my team down in Texas now. We're opening a new distribution center down there, and we're poised to open a few more stores outside of Austin, all the way across the kind of lower panhandle there. Okay. So really my goal and what we need to do is enable this seamless experience for customers. But my background at Microsoft, I always realized you really need a platform that you can build on. And the platform isn't just a monolithic thing. It's a set of services that we can pull together to allow experiences to be built that best serve our customers. So that thing in the middle is actually, if you look on the left, that's feed. And feed is heavy. Some of those bags are 50 pounds. And so what we want to do is try to figure out a better way to manage that, because that takes up valuable space. And in retail, space is money. I mean, it also is not a great customer experience for a customer to have to load that onto a cart, push it up to point of sale. It's really a wasteful type of a thing, because, and then they have to get help to take it out to their car. So we wanted to leverage our existing platform to build a digital experience to where someone could just select, the product they want, and then we would automatically load it out for them, built on the same set of kind of commerce components that we've had. So, our goal at Murdoch's is the way that probably most of you guys have the same goal, which is how do we continually serve and innovate, but do it, with a lower cost to serve. And I think our perspective is, that we're a little bit of a David against Goliath. We obviously aren't as large as, Target, Walmart, Home Depot. We competed with them in certain product categories, but customers' expectations, they don't care, how small you are, right? They want those same experiences that they're used to having, whether it's at Amazon or Target or, you name it, whatever retail kind of experiences they're used to having. And so for us, it's really about, we need to make sure that we have a platform that'll allow us to quickly evolve and innovate to serve that. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that entails in a bit. You want to hit the next one?
Yep.
I think that's my intro. The challenge is, how do we serve such broad markets, so many customers, so much complexity? How do we continue to drive down costs? And how do we meet customer expectations as they continually, the bar keeps getting raised?
Great, Robert, thank you so much for that intro. And I know we'll get back to some of the things that Murdoch's is doing to address those issues. But before we get into that, sort of a quick intro on who we are here at Texas. So I kind of laughed when you said you're expanding the state of Texas, and we always get this confusion too, where, well, we're not a state, we're a service provider, but similar pronunciation. So for the audience, who is Texas? So fundamentally, when we think about what our value prop is we really think about this every day, which is that companies don't compete, supply chains compete. And I certainly wish I came up with that quote, but I think a lot of people have claimed it, but it's certainly one that's really relevant to everything that we do. And back to what Robert said, we look to empower our customers to basically address their customers' needs. And we all know that those needs continue to grow, evolve, and challenge us every day. And when we think about Texas as a company, we've been around. This is going to be our 40th anniversary this year. So we turned the big 4-0. I don't think we qualify for AARP yet, but we're getting there. So for us, really, when we think about the customer, our customers, it's really for good companies to be great. It's to clarify the uncertainty in the supply chain. And we'll get more into that and what we're seeing in terms of what people are trying to do to equip supply chain greatness, and that good companies have the space to thrive. And I think what's important about this, and Lou mentioned it in the beginning, is, we've certainly seen disruptions really, rear their ugly heads because of COVID and other things. But those of us in supply chain know that the issue of disruptions has been around forever. And that's really what we're looking to address. In terms of our global reach here at Texas, just some quick stats, over 1,000 customers, headquartered in Montreal, European office in Copenhagen. And you can see, some steady growth with about close to 800 employees today. Again, just to some stats, we get 40 years in the business. We've been named in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, and we're very proud of the fact we're in Gartner's 2020 Healthcare Supply Chain Top 25 Masters. So really, again, it all revolves around helping our customers manage their supply chains to better support their customers. So when we think about this, and I just mentioned the notion of disruption, and I think it's always good to sort of have a basic definition, right? The act or process disruption, right? Something that's interruption, normal course or continuation activity, process, et cetera. And when we think about this, and I mentioned COVID, and Lou talked a little bit about some of this up front about disruption, we're seeing this on an everyday basis. All of us who work in supply chain, I will admit, I think when we went through the pandemic, yes, that was a global disruption, and we certainly don't want to see one of those again in our lifetime. But many of us in supply chain, in my opinion, kind of, I don't want to say rolled our eyes in a bad way, but kind of was like, well, wait a minute, we deal with this every day. We have our jobs in supply chain, our jobs in retail are about dealing with disruption. And sometimes those disruptions are good. A lot of times we think of it as negative. And we're seeing that even today, right? Some headlines that are out there around the supply chain disruptions. What was really interesting is I saw this one on the top left, is that we're having a potential worker strike on the West Coast of the United States, which again, we all know what's the ripple effect of that type of disruption that might not command the headlines a pandemic has, but we know as supply chain professionals that it really has a long-term impact on how we're able to service our customers. We know, of course, of other disruptions, such as we've seen inflation, we see what's happening with the war in Ukraine, we see what's happening with the Chinese in Taiwan, right? These things are constantly aspects of the world that we need to deal with when it comes to ensuring our customers are satisfied. And why are supply chains complex? Because that's what's happened, right? Because of globalization, because of how we've stretched our supply chains out. And I find this graphic really interesting. If you look at Lenovo's supply chain, and I believe I pulled this from KPMG, it's really interesting as you see that it's really not a chain, right? It's a network. It's an intricate, interconnected network, whether it's software providers, electronics manufacturers, right? Chemical manufacturers, the raw materials, opticals, et cetera. All of a sudden you realize that disruptions become so much more impactful. Why? Because our supply chains aren't chains, they're networks. And we all know that sometimes a disruption in one part of the network could have sort of that butterfly effect and impact other parts of the network, which we're not aware of. But again, think about your own business, your own supply chain, how your network is built to support your customers' needs. And if we look, I think this is always sobering, but it's a good reminder of that there are true impacts when it comes to some of these supply chain disruptions. According to McKinsey in 2019, there was 40 weather disasters costing over $1 billion each. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I remember seeing a famous picture when there was the flooding in the tsunami in Southeast Asia many years ago, where there was a picture of a Toyota plant with all their cars underwater because they'd been flooded. So basically all of their inventory, all their finished goods, all of a sudden overnight were basically rendered impractical. You couldn't use them anymore. Organizations surveyed lose close to $184 million annually due to global supply chain disruptions. You look again, McKinsey says that within 10 years, supply chain disruptions tally close to half of profits. And that's real money, right? This goes down, or this goes to the CFO, where they're going to be looking at this. As you can see, one long-term disruption of production could cost companies 30–50% of a year's EBITDA. So these are really having impacts financially on our businesses. And I think this is interesting too, is on average, companies can expect losses equaling to almost 45% of 1 year's profit over the course of a decade. So these disruptions are having true negative impacts on our businesses. So therefore, how are we as supply chain professionals and as a business going to better address this and try to maybe not necessarily stop these disruptions, but how do we react quicker and react in a more efficient way to these disruptions? One of the things that we're starting to see more and more on, and Lou touched upon this at the beginning, is some of the things that we're starting to lean on. Now, a lot of these, I think, to a lot of us, we take this, I don't say for granted, but yeah, of course we do this. But of course, data, right? The usage of more and more data and information. And I know that data has become so abundant and plentiful that we just assume that we'll have data about anything we need. But I would say that one of the things that we're seeing when it comes to this aspect of data is first is data hygiene. How clean is the data? I think second is the speed of data, right? How quickly can I get or extract information from my network to take action? For example, I remember I worked with a large retailer many years ago who had access to a tremendous amount of data. But they told me, they said, Guy, the problem we have is this, is I can find all this really rich data down to the store level, down to, hey, if this store in Topeka is selling this combination of outfit and it's better than the store in Los Angeles, I can then shift my inventory. But what they told me was, but the data is a week old. So when I get that data that tells me that, hey, this shirt and pant combination at this store is selling like hotcakes. We need to restock that store. By the time I get that data, it might be too late. They might have had, stockouts. That demand might have shrunken. That demand might have gone somewhere else. So the data, when we think about it, it's not just the quantity and the quality, but it's the speed by which we can get access to it. Of course, systems. And, we touched upon this in the beginning about some of the questions that SEDLAC has put out there. People are a little interested in ERP, WMS, TMS, OMS, all these solutions that are out there, these systems. And we're certainly seeing that this continues to be an important tool to leverage when it comes to understanding how we deal with disruptions. How can we better leverage the existing systems we have in place or additional systems to therefore take out some of the complexity of our supply chains, of our networks, to make better decisions? Labor. I think labor is obviously very important. I know that we're going to touch a bit more upon this and how labor plays a role in this, but labor across the board, whether it's labor in your warehouse, at your factory level, your last mile, in your store, in your facilities, wherever that may be. Labor is something that we're seeing when I look at, especially when it comes to fulfillment, there's a tremendous strain on labor. Labor is becoming more and more difficult to attract, retain, and maintain, whether it's in your fulfillment center, in your transportation nodes, in your stores, wherever that may be. And the reality is this, at some level, labor is representative of your brand, of your business, regardless if you're in B2B or B2C. That labor is going to be many times the only touch point you will have with the end customer. So how qualified, how well do you train, how well do you manage your labor, how well do you leverage some systems and data to enhance the labor you have? And finally, robotics. And I think this goes hand in hand in a large way with the labor question. Right now, a lot of what I've seen out there is that people are looking to robots to be almost a panacea at times for the shortage of labor. But the reality is that robotics and automation on the physical side, I believe, needs to be viewed as much more as a complementary aspect to what we're seeing with the labor side. So it's not just a robot coming in and we're going to buy a robot to replace worker X, Y, and Z. It's how do we leverage robotics to enhance potentially labor X and Y and free up labor Z to go do something else. Now, yes, there are absolutely some functions we're seeing, and we've seen this absolutely in the manufacturing sector for decades, if not centuries now, where automation is being leveraged to do what? To do jobs that are dangerous, repetitive, and boring. We see, if you go to an automotive plant, you'll see a number of robotic arms doing things like welding and painting and other things. Well, that is because those are jobs that, let's face it, labor, human labor, it's dangerous. It's hard to do, and it makes more sense to entrust a robot to do it. But if I look at other sectors, such as warehousing, we're seeing more and more robotics in warehousing. Yes, some of it is to replace humans, but the majority of it is really to complement the FT, the full-time employees you have in your warehouse, in your fulfillment sector. So we'll look more into that in a little bit as well. But again, when we think about what are the pillars that we can lean upon to, again, prepare ourselves to deal with disruptions, it's really around the data that's out there, the systems we use, our labor, and the robotics. And when we think about this notion of automation, because again, I think what we have to think about is automation is going to come into different flavors or different areas. But this is a really interesting quote from Gartner, that most chief supply chain officers that agree that over the next 10 years, the most advanced global supply chains will be leveraging hyper automation. A combination of technologies include robotic process automation, RPA, machine learning, and many others to become more autonomous. And part of that, I believe, is driven by the fact that as disruptions continue to be part of our world, but as the pace by which these disruptions pop up, but also at the pace by which our consumers are expecting services from us, and I think Robert touched upon this earlier, and I think he'll get more into it about Murdoch's, is obviously, Robert's customers and Murdoch's and the customers that we all deal with, their expectations are being driven by external factors. And what I found is, and I think we've all found, is that our expectations over the weekend, meaning when we're home as consumers and what we expect certain things to arrive at our doorsteps, et cetera, those expectations don't stop when we show up on Monday to the office or to a Zoom call to start the week. So our expectations from the B2C world are translating to the B2B world. And we're going to see more and more of this. And part of this hyper automation is the ability to allow us as humans to have the systems make more decisions and make the systems work for us in certain areas while we focus on other value-added areas as humans. So when we think about this, sort of this automation world, I want you to think about, and we'll get more into this during the questions, I'm sure, the digital side, which again is the processes that we automate, the systems we put in place to help me do things such as better allocation of resources, better sourcing decisions, better manufacturing plans, better logistics plans, better slotting in my warehouse, right? That is leveraging these systems in a digital world to make decisions that, while yes, I could make it, the system can make it a lot more quickly and a lot more efficiently. Physical, and this is back to the robotic side, where we're seeing physical robotics, physical automation playing more and more of a role within our supply chain. Everything from, how we do farming, sourcing, how we do manufacturing, how we do warehousing, how we do last mile fulfillment, how we do returns, right? We're going to see more and more of this physical automation. And my belief is that we're going to see more and more of it creeping into our daily lives. Any of you who go out grocery shopping, one of the things that I'm always fascinated is you're starting to see more physical automation in the grocery store to help with our day-to-day activity in the grocery store. There's an interesting company called Badger that does in-aisle monitoring of spills. So you'll see these robots going up and down the aisle to make sure there's no spills, nothing that we could slip on, things of that nature where, in the past, yeah, labor would look for that and all this, but that's a very boring and tedious job. Why not bring in a physical robot to do it? But I think we're going to see more and more of this from a consumer side, getting closer and closer to our daily lives. And finally, the third part of this automation triangle is really the impact it has on people. So how does this impact your people? How does this impact the processes and the workflows and the change management that your people need to deal with? So I want everybody to think about this when we start talking more and more about the automation aspect of supply chain. Think about how it impacts these three parts of the triangle. Now, if we look at Gartner's hype cycle about this, I think this is really sort of a good sort of high-level roadmap of where we think things are going with automation. As you can see on this journey, as mentioned earlier in the quote, right, RPA, IoT, augmented intelligence is sort of the first stage, right? More robotic process automation, more leveraging of connected devices, more augmented intelligence, right? Really artificial intelligence, sort of version 1. And as we move forward, we're going to see more machine learning, digital twinning, this interesting concept of responsible AI. I just heard an interesting segment this morning on the BBC talking about how governments are trying to figure out how do we control AI and can it be controlled? And then, of course, sort of the end goal at some level is this AI human augmentation. Some of us might have seen sort of Elon Musk's latest thing about starting to put computerization into humans, right? This human augmentation. I'm still questioning that. But again, if we think about this, how do we bring more of this automation from a digital perspective and a physical perspective into our daily lives, our processes, so that we make our supply chains that much more nimble to deal with our end customers and the disruptions we know are going to happen across the board. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Robert, because I think we're going to dive in a little deeper now into some of these concepts from a real world example with Murdoch's. So Robert, over to you.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I think what you laid out there teed this up in terms of we're really at this place in technology where it's this new influx of capabilities, really, that tools that we as humans and supply chain directors, CIOs, or whatever have to figure out how it's going to impact us, because there's no question it will. And this quote is from Klaus Schwab. All the wealthy people fly into Davos. That's this guy. And basically about 3 or 4 years ago, coined this term, the fourth industrial revolution, which essentially said we're at this verge of this mergers of technology, particularly around ubiquitous connectivity, right? Which we see around everything being connected into the internet. AI and machine learning, automation, robotics, big data and analytics, all coming together that will be massive, could be massive disruptions to society, which is why governments are very interested in this. But they will no doubt reshape how we do business. So I think from my perspective, as a technologist, as a CIO, I have to say, how are we going to prepare for this kind of tectonic shift, for all of this new kind of AI technology, and how do you apply it to your business? And I think, you talked about, the digitization, and you talked about the technology and the people piece. Really, people are the core, right, to everything that we do. And if you think about disruption, AI is really learning about based upon what it's already seen. You train it on massive amounts of data. A lot of disruption like COVID, who would have predicted the pandemic, and who would have subsequently predicted some of the knock-on impacts, right, of that everyone would jump on a Peloton and all these types of things. And so I think one of the key things you want to do is say your people are your greatest asset in terms of being able to face disruption, to figure things out and be creative and all those things. And so how can you leverage the technology to, like you said, Guy, do the boring stuff, do the dangerous stuff, manage the day-to-day, so that we can elevate people into being kind of more forward-looking, as well as kind of more design-centric in terms of coming up with innovation for their business. And so when I think about this, I really bucket into three things, and I start with people and culture. And one of the things that we've tried to do is really look at, as we hire people into kind of our roles, I look for, this kind of growth mindset, if you will, of people that want to kind of learn new things and grasp things. And I might start them in one role and I move them around into different things so that they can learn a breadth of different either business processes or things within IT to make sure that they have this kind of change resilience. And I think organizations need change resilience, because we're going to enter this phase where things are going to come at us pretty fast. And if there's one thing that we're seeing with machine learning, which is kind of a testament to this, OpenAI launched ChatGPT, which you guys may have played with, very interesting technology. And they released that to the public on November 22nd, just of this last year. By December 15th, so not less than a month, there was 1 million daily active users of that technology. By February of this year, of 2023, there were over 100 million daily active users of ChatGPT. And that's the fastest growing consumer application in the history of the world in terms of just the growth. Today, there are over almost 1 billion active user sessions of the OpenAI, either the APIs or ChatGPT or DALL-E, which is continuing to grow at this exponential rate. The LLM is continuing to grow. Everyone that's prompting it is actually programming it. So that's just a testament of change. So how's all that going to get incorporated into business models? Well, from our perspective too, one of the things that we've had to do is this concept of process as a product. Process. So when you digitize, systems really are digitization of end-to-end processes. So if you think of procure to pay or order to cash, those systems manage those processes, but those processes have been around hundreds of years. If you're a merchant, you had to buy stuff, you had a purchase order of some kind. I think even back to some of the first tablets from Samaria were purchase orders and complaints about the quality of copper. So supply chains have existed for thousands of years, and the processes have been incorporated, have changed somewhat. The systems digitize kind of the documents as they flow through these processes. But really what you really need is the business ownership of those processes. I think I've seen it happen where essentially the business hands over the processes to IT because they're essentially now in an ERP system or a CRM system or something. but the IT can never be the owner of those processes. And so I'm very clear with my kind of business customers that, in fact, we just replaced a ERP system that the company had been using for over 20 years. And I basically said that if we're going to do this, it's not an IT project. It's got to be a business project. And we identified key business owners that owned their processes end to end, because as the change happens, right, and we iterate and we learn, the constant really is the outcome of those processes, right? So if it's, hey, I own the purchase, the replenishment process. Well, the metrics have to be very clear around in stock and what is my landed cost targets and all these things. That can't be an IT thing, right? And so as the underlying technology changes, we continue to use technology as a tool to take complexity out of the process and automate as much of it as possible. And that's where your AI frameworks and your RPAs are going to really, really help. But you really have to define that process very clearly and get those business owners almost like a engineering mindset with your business owner. So a lot of times you hire people into roles and they're kind of more relationship focused, and that's good, but you're really going to need someone that is able to understand what the end-to-end processes are and kind of think like an engineer. And then technology really is just a function of supporting all these things. So it provides a toolkit essentially that you can apply to kind of your process management. So it's really important that you have these systems of record that house those processes, whatever they are. Even if it's a sales to quote or order to cash, like all those are maybe unique to your business, but you have to have these systems of records. And this is where your ERPs and your CRMs and all these systems come together. Most of them don't kind of talk together, but that's becoming less important because you have these data and analytics platforms, especially enabled through the cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, that you can actually feed data into and then do things with that data that we just couldn't even foresee being able to economically do just a few years ago. And one of the things I'm really excited about, and that's kind of why I took this role, is, I talked about the Davids and the Goliaths. Well, one of the things about a lot of these technologies is they allow small guys to have the same exact tools as the big guys, and in some ways be more nimble, right? Because the smaller players aren't held back by a lot of legacy in a lot of cases. So we're able to pull things out and implement some of these newer technologies that allow us to kind of be more nimble and be ready for this kind of AI and automation framework, which we talk about the AI ready solutions. A lot of vendors this is going to be a hype cycle term, right? Like everyone's talking about AI you see it all through. If you've been in technology long enough, there's all these little terms that pop up that get used. And I think the debate is AI really a hype cycle type thing, or is it real? And my illustration of how fast you've had adoption of the OpenAI frameworks, Microsoft's really creative partnership with OpenAI, I thought was really interesting. That this kind of open source nonprofit merging with the Microsoft's providing all of the compute in their Azure basically for free right now. It's kind of a freemium model. But then Microsoft's really working to figure out how to plug in AI to Outlook so it can have these task assistants to basically sift through all your email and then tell you exactly what to focus on that day. To even one of the interesting things that we've been playing with is the meeting. You can have your meeting assistant. So if I get triple booked sometimes, so the meeting assistant can actually go to one of those meetings and it listens for my name and that tells me here's all my action items, or I need to follow up with someone. So it allows me to be present actually in 3 places at once. So I can actually know what I need to go do. So as these vendors figure out how to plug this stuff in, I think we'll get some interesting use cases. I think it's very much like, if I had to kind of come up with an analogy, you had the merger of kind of cloud computing and kind of mobile all coming together, kind of what 2007 Apple launched the iPhone. And a lot of people are like, I was actually in a meeting with Steve Ballmer, and someone asked him the question, was he worried about the iPhone? And this Microsoft was working with BlackBerry at the time, and we had our own kind of mobile operating system. And he kind of laughed and said, who would pay $500 or $600 for a phone? And he's like, everyone wants a physical keyboard too, because that's just on a screen, right? And what he missed was there were actually pieces coming together that would drive a massive amount of innovation. So Uber could not exist, right, without the GPS in the phone, without the apps, and without the cloud being able to manage the application and everything that's going on with matching riders. So it's the usually convergence of things that provide where the innovation is going to happen. And I honestly think that this is another one of those big kind of technological moments. And I think that right now, a lot of the vendors are just trying to figure out how it's going to plug in. But we're already seeing a lot of application of it. And I think an example, and I'll get to it on a subsequent slide on the next one, is how it's assisting with RPA, which is robotic process automation. So I think it's really important, as the CIOs, is that we really rationalize our vendors. We want to really focus on vendors that get it, that work, I call it partner with us. So, and depending on your specific technology ecosystem, your vendors may be, you may pick different vendors. But for me, when I got here, we had like 50 different vendors. We had, we had GoToMeeting, we had Teams, we had Slack stuff, we had all these things, and it's like, why are we managing all that? What we really need to do is kind of narrow it down, the footprint, and we pick horses. I call it, let's pick a horse that we want to ride in the race, and then we partner with those vendors. So I firmly believe you have to, like any good relationship, we have to work with those vendors to continue to make them better. And I've done that with Texas. We're a customer of Texas, and we continue to push them. And I always say that it's not going to be easy, being a vendor of ours, but you will be better at the end of it, because we're going to continue to push. And then I'm a huge believer of a service mindset and technology, where once we enable these technologies and these platforms, it's our job to make sure that we drive that service level up, and I drive the cost down on an ongoing basis, right? So with these inflationary times, a lot of vendors are using an excuse to say, hey, we got to raise prices. I really want to try and understand what's behind the price increase, right? Because once software is written, it generally continues to run. And so there's a cost driver, but we really need to make sure that we understand what those cost drivers are and what's controllable on our end. And big data is one of those areas too, where once you start throwing a lot of data and doing a lot of things, you really have to have good visibility into where that cost is. So to kind of set this up in terms of where our foundational pillars are, people are really first, and it's because they are where the change begins to happen. And if you're not supporting your teams as we move into this very, uncertain area, you back them up with training, back them up with opportunity, and give them access to tools to do their job, then they will pull you through, right? But I think just like any human endeavor, you want this plurality of people coming together that are essentially leaning into the change. Because if they're not, you could implement all sorts of technologies. You could try to systemize process. You could try to do RPA, but it's just not going to take. And what you really want is your teams. It's embedded in the DNA of your team, whether it's your business teams and your IT teams, and they should actually work so closely together that you won't be able to tell them apart when they're in the meeting because they're focused on the same thing. And so over time, we're going to see this convergence of, the harder part of technology, just is the same thing with and it's a good segue to this. We want to basically abstract that hard part of the technology and really focus on how that technology is going to serve the team. Technology should serve us. We shouldn't serve it. And in the past, 10, 15, 20 years, people have to do contortions to get things done in their ERP systems and do all sorts of workarounds. And we want to set this up to where technology is actually serving kind of business and what we're trying to do from an outcome. So what we focused on this journey to kind of get into kind of AI and automation is first, we really, and we're somewhat fortunate because we started this ERP journey a little over a year ago to replace the ERP system. And so as part of replacing the ERP system, you have to really look at what the as is processes were and how are we going to support that in the new system. And so it was a change management opportunity for me to really push my co-leaders on leadership team to kind of identify who is going to own the key processes. And so it's very critical that full-time employees need to be accountable for the process outcomes and performance. So I put this on here because, I've been in companies where they've outsourced some key processes to Accenture or somebody, and then they kind of abdicate responsibility. And then they wonder why the throughput and the efficiency and the cost never comes down, and the vendor doing this isn't really incented to drive those costs down because they're making money per PO or they're making money per transaction. So driving process ownership into your full-time employees is critical because they are really going to be the process engineer that really understands what the outcome is. And what we then also did was, as we were going through this, really said, hey, where are your bottlenecks and constraints? That's, if you think of lean and you think of kind of these tools around Six Sigma, which are about process baseline, understanding kind of where things start to break down, if things are running smooth, there's not enough hours in a day. So let's focus on where we can really drive automation to improve throughput. So for us, what we really want to do is, I said we had 300,000 products earlier. We have something like 7,100 vendors, a massive number. We process over 30,000 invoices every week for a small company, a small set of AP. We really wanted, the constraint for us was that procure to pay, and really like, how do we automate the replenishment cycles and how do we push more things to the vendors in an automated way, either via EDI or another format. And then how do we drive, whether it's two-way, three-way match automatically back in. And a lot of our vendors are smaller guys and they'd send us like PDFs and things like that. So we really wanted to leverage the OCR capabilities in, Power Platform. That's Microsoft's name for a set of RPAs and tools that they've brought together to then push that all the way through. What we found was, there were bottlenecks that we'd find in terms of certain vendors that were sending us things in ways in which it was kind of garbage in, garbage out. So we kind of then historically would have just, manually processed that. And I really pushed to not do that. I said, we really need to throw those in a pile. I told the AP department, throw those in a pile, and my team, our team will go drive back to the vendor and like make sure they can send us something that we can process automatically through. And so that's been a really interesting process. As of today, we're back up over 28,000 kind of invoices, and 95% of those are completely automated through, which it was sub 50, in the high 40s previously on the old system. So we'll continue to drive there. And then, like I said, just being really kind of creating this data-driven and iterative approach. Once you set a target, you can only improve what you measure, right? And the interesting about kind of, like I said, this RPA and AI and all this automation is it's just a tool. It's not sentient, it's not Skynet yet, where it's going to start doing stuff for you. And hopefully not take us out because it's like, oh, well, humans really are the problem and the bottlenecks, and maybe we'll remove them, right? Like in Skynet, I think they programmed it and said, its goal was to end war. And then the AI figured out, well, to end war, you just take out all the people. And that's not the case here. And what we try to do is like encourage, our teams to engage. And it's like, hey, we're not going to take you out. We're actually going to get you working on more interesting things, because who wants to sit and stare at a computer screen and match up the invoice amount to the PO, and did they send this amount, and go back and forth. So we're trying to really drive that all the way through the process. And I think, the underlying kind of thing that we've learned is really to give our people the permission to evolve. Our organizations at the end of the day are a set and an organization of people that come together around a singular mission, like to deliver for your customers and to build something. I mean, that's a human, at the core of all of us, that's what we want to be. We want to be part of something. We want to be purpose driven, and we want to know why we do things. And part of this is to, these changes that are coming is we really have to know that a lot of our people are going to be nervous about it, especially when we start doing some of these projects like, oh, what's my job going to be next? And there will be something. That's just the nature of it, is there's going to be complexity. There's going to be disruption. And what we'd like people to do is go focus on that and not focus on, the process of managing a lot of these day-to-day tasks. And we want to be very data-driven. And we want to then come back and use the data to say, hey, where can we drive even more improvement, and create this kind of improvement and engineering mindset. So with that, I think that that is what we have done and been doing. Obviously, it's a journey and we're not there yet. But I think it's really important, when I said lay out the blueprint, you have to set a foundation for what you want to build on. And that foundation is based upon obviously your people and that culture of making sure that it's okay to make mistakes. It's a learning culture, and technology and stuff's going to come out as fast. So that's okay. No one knows the answers. We're going to be incompetent sometimes. That's vulnerability. It's important that our people know that. It's important that we have that key process ownership, that we kind of promote those people as business process owners. And we say, hey, you're accountable for how this thing performs. And we're going to give you the resources in terms of the technologies to help you deliver against your goals. And I build my IT teams as essentially, service minded. We're a service function. So we seek to understand what our business teams are trying to do. We bring our perspective. We're not order takers. But we also, we don't say no and we don't say yes. We provide options, costs, feedback, trade-offs, and knowledge. But we try to come in with a very egoless approach, with one goal, which is to enable our business teams to be successful in what they're trying to do. So I think with those three pillars, that forms our foundation, obviously, and our mission and culture kind of unites all of it.
Okay, well, Robert, thank you very much. Kara, I think we have a few questions here to get started, and then anyone else in the audience that wants to add to our questions, again, use your Q&A box and we'll try to address as many as we can. Kara?
All right, thanks, Lou. Again, thanks, Robert and Guy. We did have several questions that came in. And like Lou said, if there's any other questions that those online have, please enter them now. So the first question that came in is, what front office savings did Murdoch see from implementing Texas?
Well, so we were on a different OMS. So we implemented the Order Dynamics, which is the distributed OMS system that Texas has. And one of the things, it's a people-based thing. The savings we really got was in tack time from picking orders. So what we do is the order comes into our .com, and then it flips over to OD, and then OD determines basically where it's best fulfilled from. And we use a number of heuristics and rules to drive where that is. And then that order flows down to someone in our store to go pick it, pack it, get it ready to go. So I think the main thing is the simplicity of the solution, especially the picking application, and having all the data at the fingertips of our associate to pick the order. Probably saved 10 minutes per pick. So if you start saying, hey, we've got, we probably do 400,000 orders, it starts to add up, especially in labor shortage situation. I think that that it's a constraint, right? Like we saw it during COVID, like if you just don't have people, you get constrained in that space. And so it's freeing up associates to face customers because we can process those online orders faster.
All right.
Well, there's some significant savings there for sure. I thought it was an interesting point that you made that, you as an organization from the information systems perspective, view yourselves as service to the company and not the other way around. And I think, I'm not going to say that's unique, but I think in many cases, it's not how projects are looked at. And, I think, that's important for people in the audience to understand that, it's really it's got to be a teamwork. And the ownership, to your point, has to be who is really the one that's working with that process. They understand what the process is. They understand what the bottlenecks are. And again, use your resources. And ideally, those are internal resources. You made an excellent point that a lot of companies are outsourcing their IT functionality, and the driver for their success is not necessarily in 100% conformance with what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. We're a consulting firm.
As well as business process outsourcing. So, that business process gets encapsulated in a system and a set of steps. And once it gets thrown over to a BPO, oftentimes there's no innovation, there's no leaning up that process, and so then that can drive actually disruption and cost. So I think having people on the hook, a butt on the line, as Steve Jobs used to say, is very important. We can't abdicate responsibility. If we pick a vendor or we outsource, that's on us. It's like if we're the GC and we pick a sub, it's still, we're accountable for it. We pick them and we still got to keep a hand on the tiller.
Absolutely. The next question is biggest lessons learned from partnering with Texas.
Well, for me, it's like, it's like a marriage, right? It's all really, roses and everything's going to be happily ever after. And the sales guys are in there selling and the technology is going to be great and everything's going to work. And then, 2-3 years in, or weeks in, there's going to be issues. And so I think it's really important that you pick vendors that have they align with you in terms of, even like culture, philosophy, responsiveness, but really it's an ongoing thing. So you can't just, once you've got a vendor and you've picked the technology, it's ensuring that vendor is really, what I always say is I look at 3 things whenever I work with vendor, and Texas is no different. The first is they have to be able to do what you're asking them to do, right? And I want them to have I don't want to be the guinea pig. I want them to have proven capability. Second, obviously cost, right? It has to make sense. Like someone pitched me something one time and it was like the price of it was like $1 million or something. I'm like, well, I could hire like 8 or 9 people for that. And they would probably, and I can't even, and what you're doing is trying to automate a piece of my business that my cost would not even justify the price of the solution. So I think it's like cost per whatever, really understanding what the cost to price ratio is and making sure that makes sense. And then the third, and probably maybe the most important in light of what we're talking about is basically that they have a vision. They have R&D, and they kind of come with a point of view about, and they got the passion behind it, because ultimately, like in this day and age too, I call it, you either have product companies or you have IP landlords. And IP landlords generally are owned by private equity or whatever, and they're just trying to squeeze everything out. And you like go and there's usually a carousel of players. Like, you'll get a customer success manager, and then 3 weeks later there's a new one, and all this. And what I want is longevity, and I want innovation, and I want a commitment to the product that they're building, and that's part of the reason why we actually honestly left our ERP player, is it was a private equity owned thing, and there was just no innovation being driven back in, and prices kept going up, and I just didn't see value for it. So we jumped to a different one where really it was a commitment to R&D. They were a product company and they had a vision. So I think Texas has that, and they also made commitments in their roadmap to some critical things that we're going to need. So it's like picking those vendors around those 3 things, I think, is important.
Well, just to build, sorry, I was going to say, just to build on that, and I think what Robert said is spot on. And I'll certainly admit that we did not have, we've had a regular relationship, but it's had its ups and downs, but we've worked through them, right? We've learned from them, and we've worked together to innovate and to address what Murdoch's and Robert's team has been asking for. And it doesn't mean we necessarily just do everything they say either, right? I think it's definitely a relationship where we're working with folks like Murdoch's to understand what their need is, where does it fit in the roadmap, and how do we better solve for it.
I mean, I think the key there is the word partnership. I mean, you have to go into it as a partnership, and you have to work together. We see that all the time from the perspective of working with clients. It has to be not just, what we think is best or what the client thinks is best, but it's ultimately that partnership that says, let's go through that process and make sure, in fact, that the end result is the best. So certainly very valid points over there. Beyond that, one of the questions that comes up here is, okay, how do I get started on this journey? What's the takeaways from this session in terms of how do I help my organization move forward on this automation and systems journey? So Guy, you want to start first?
Sure. I mean, I think it's one of those billion-dollar questions, right? And I think I'm going to put my old industry analyst hat on for this. I'm going to say it depends. But I do think why it depends is that each individual company, even each individual department within a company, has to understand, what does this mean for them with regards to that journey. And I think Robert talked about this, right? There's a lot of different tools we can use to automate processes within our business. But we have to understand and use a cliche, but start with the end goal in mind and work backwards. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And what a great example that Robert brought up is, can we automate certain processes like, two-way matching, things of that nature, because we're looking to free up that labor and those people to now focus on other things that are much more human-centric value, meaning being more creative, trying to think of new business models, things of that nature. So, thinking about what are the processes or what are the things within my day-to-day activity, within my long-term goals, that I might be able to lean on a process automation, even a physical automation, to then take that on. But, and I think, Robert's sort of 3 bullet points on why he looks at a vendor, I think also feed into that, one of which is also cost. I think the example of talking to a vendor who's going to sell you $1 million solution, and you say to yourself, wait a minute, I could hire 6 people to do that. So why am I going to just automate it for the sake of it? I remember speaking to Caterpillar years ago in a prior life of mine, and there's certain areas of the world where they said, listen, we can't sell our physical tractors or things like that because people will say, cost how much? They say, how much the cost of labor is for me? It's so minimal. I can hire 100 people to dig that hole, so I don't need that shiny new backhoe you were offering, because I don't need to automate it. I can do it with physical labor because I can afford it and I can have that ability. So I think that's part of it, Lou. I think is to have a discipline to understand where and what processes could be automated, whether it's digital or physical, and then secondarily is do that assessment of how much is it going to cost and is it worth it, because it might just be a shiny object that I don't need to pursue right now, in which case maybe focus on something else. But I think again, it's almost that first step is to do that audit of your processes to understand what's happening.
Okay, thanks, Guy. Robert, anything that you'd want to add to what Guy just said there?
I think star of the end of mine is great. You really have to find a problem and collectively unite all your stakeholders around what the problem is. I think a Kaizen workshop or something coming together around, pick one specific kind of pain point that you're having in your business, where you can get an interdisciplinary team of some IT folks and your business teams together to work to come up with a solution. We used to call them 30-day blitzes, like something you can accomplish within a short period of time. And that's going to give your teams a lot of, learning opportunity and confidence. And you can start bringing a few of these technologies in. A lot of the platforms you can sign up for on a trial basis now, for, very limited, if not free, and try things out. So I think it's important just to get started, but really find a couple of areas where it's like, hey, if we could improve this, it would make a difference. And then get those teams starting to work together, because the future, of this quote industrial revolution or this tectonic shift is everyone has to learn how to use this stuff. So if you haven't used OpenAI and signed up for ChatGPT, go do it, play with the prompts, see what it can do for you. Now imagine how that stuff's going to merge into kind of some of your business processes, and then pick a couple areas just to kind of get started.
Okay, great, thank you. Carrie, do you have another question there?
Sure. In general, do you see a need for a middleware when incorporating automation, or is the WMS able to accommodate multiple types of automation? Starting with Guy.
Well, it depends. I think certain kinds of automation, if we're talking about the physical automation, robotics, whether it's an AMR, an AGV, ASRS, whatever flavor of physical automation you're looking for, yes, a lot of times we would require some type of middleware between the WMS and that physical robotic system. Why? Because a lot of times that physical robotic system, let's take a picking robot, for example, an AMR solution, right? They're going to have their own software to tell that robot how to proceed with pick orders, what to pick first, when to pick it, etc. So you want the WMS system to relay the messages down, but to have that robotic system ingest them and then take their appropriate action. On the digital side, I certainly think you don't really need necessarily a middleware layer. I think a lot of times with the WMS, it is going to automate a lot of the processes you might want. But I think to Robert's point, what you need to do is to work with your WMS provider to understand what could be automated moving forward. What are some of the other workflows within a WMS, within a warehouse that you could automate through the WMS? But I don't believe from that perspective, you necessarily need a middleware layer, more of just working with that partner to understand and integrate it. But on the physical side, for the most part, yes, you're going to be looking for some type of flavor of middleware to tie in that physical automated tool with a WMS.
Very critical for us, just because it loosely couples. We can actually unify a lot of different components. And we use, even though I'm mostly Microsoft, I actually use AWS events, Event Bridge, to bring, and that allows me to do some very interesting things as well. Like in the scenario, so buy online, pick up in store. Right now, Order Dynamics only supports email notification, and our customers have been asking for text. And so it's like, how do we do that? Well, I just signed up for a Twilio. I actually get those events because our communication to OD, to Order Dynamics, is through my Event Bridge. And I just interrogate that event, fire it over to Twilio. It took us like 25 minutes to set it up, and now those guys can get a text. So it allows people to move quickly because I can decouple the monolithic functionality that might sit in an application and take advantage of these ancillary, call them specialist services that exist now that you're starting to see pop up.
That's great.
Okay. Kara, are there any more questions that you have over there?
I have a couple more. How does someone determine when they need to update or replace their existing ERP or WMS?
I could talk. Oh, go ahead, Robert. Yeah.
How do they know if they need to?
Yep.
So part of it is, like I said, if the innovation, like if we start seeing that there is no kind of path forward in terms of how to incorporate AI, for example, how are we going to do that? How do we drive more automation into the process? How easy are they to work with? How do they take accountability? There's a lot of, it's like any partnership that you have to assess. And then obviously it's like cost as well. Like oftentimes the vendors that once you're on an ERP system, they feel like it's a captive type audience, and they're pretty opaque with their pricing and how you get hit with price increases. And so I think it's important also to understand that. So, for us, we were on this old 20-year-old system and it kind of worked, but also there was a ton of workarounds in the business. So when I came in, I as an outsider, just looking at it, I'm like, wow, you guys are serving the system. The system really isn't serving you. They would do all sorts of workarounds to serve our customers. And it's like, hey, we have to suspend this. We'll go here. And, like inventory, for example, like when it was inbound from the DC would actually show on hand in the store. And it was like, well, it's going to take a few days. You saw how big our area is. It's going to take a while to roll all the way from, Laramie, Wyoming, all the way up to Kalispell. But yeah, it was showing on hand. And it's like, oh yeah, that's the way the system works. There is no in transit. And so I'm like, really? So I had to dig into that, and it's like true. And so like what you'll find is you'll have all these instances that as you walk around your business, like, yep, that's the way the system works. We got to do that. We got to do that. And I think that ultimately over time, it's like in the Gulliver's Travels, like each single decision like that's like a string, where he's laying down, taking the nap, and the little Piscians are like throwing the strings over Gulliver. Well, eventually, like you wake up, it's like the frog boiling, like the frog is boiling and no one really realized it because it's slowly every little workaround and, thing that you do outside of the system and the sticky note on the computer for every operator to say, remember to do this and not that, because then the system will freak out. Like, I think it's intuitive at that point sometimes that you might need a new system.
Yeah. Sorry, just to rebuild on that too. I think it absolutely is to look at your systems and to understand, back to this audit of where you want to automate, whether it's physical or digital, and understand, is that platform going to be able to address those needs? And I think Robert mentioned this, right? To talk a lot about understanding, where is the roadmap going? Is this an IP landlord? I love that statement, right? Is this an IP landlord that's just trying to milk that revenue stream? And I think we know a number of players who are out there who fit that category, and that's just be aware of it, going in eyes wide open with it. But I will say this, it's not an easy choice, right? It's these systems, ours included, right? We have a lot of value once we're in, and just switching is a challenge. But it also it's sometimes it's necessary, and I think that's the hard part. But I think Robert mentioned this too, right? You got to keep assessing and think about it, and how does it fit within your overall strategy with your people.
Yeah, it's not a one single thing where you're going to know. And for us, I think the final kind of straw, if you will, was just, they were going to end support for the version of the system they're on anyway. And so I was like, okay, well, if they're going to do that, then we're going to have to lift and shift into something else. Let's take a look. Let's do an RFP. Let's evaluate those vendors. Switching costs are real. And it's an expensive proposition. In fact, a good rule of thumb, and I've found it to be true, I think it was Gartner or somebody else, to switch on an ERP system, you should take your annual licensing that you get in the deal and multiply it by 5. That's going to be your implementation costs. And we're pretty close to that.
Very good. Very good. Well, we're coming close to the end of the session here. I mean, I think, key points, change is inevitable. You need to prepare for it and make sure that you've got change management in place and communications to ensure that everyone's bought into the program, that it is a partnership, that you need to work with all of the associates to understand their needs and help build on that. And, basically, it is a journey without a question. change and disruption is going to continue to happen, and how you prepare for it and to deal with it, I think, are the key elements there. So certainly I'd like to express our gratitude to Robert and Guy for providing this information to us today. A reminder to our audience that there are 2 more sessions. If you've registered for this, you will get the ability to go into future sessions. If you are so inclined, we'd welcome you sending forward to others that you think may be interested in the either a recording of this or future sessions, and get them registered. And other than that, we thank you for your time, and we appreciate you spending a portion of your day with us. Any closing comments, Kara, beyond that?
No, I just, once again, thank you, Robert and Guy, for joining us this morning, and thank you to all online for joining, and we hope to see you in August at our next event.
All right. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.